And so here is the intro this morning. Once again, the intro that Richard Berger prepared for us. Let's go with it and start from there.
It's the best part of the show. Give it to me. Oh, yeah. Woo. Woo. Come on. Suck it to me.
Good morning, Timothy, once again. So I can see that you're in a very good mood this morning. Happy to see that, of course. Good morning to everybody once again who is watching us on LinkedIn, on YouTube, also on Facebook, and who is listening to us in Clubhouse. I'm sure you already know Timothy Langley very well as the CEO of Langley Squire, a consultancy firm in downtown Tokyo. And he is reporting from somewhere in Chiba, I believe, today, not from Katsuyama, seemingly. And well, we're going to hear from him about the latest news in Japanese politics. And of course, some other things, I believe, but let's see what they are. Timothy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maya, and good morning, everybody. This is the 108th episode of Japanese Politics One-on-One, where we bring to you, the audience, issues of topical importance in Japanese politics that is going on right now that you need to be aware of. And so we hopefully brief you on these in a very tightly crafted 30-minute briefing so that you're up to speed, that you can, pursue your job and your interests. You can represent your companies in discussions that are going on a daily level. So thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much, Maya. Today is February 26th. We had the anniversary of the Ukrainian invasion by Russia on Thursday. It was the 24th.
Yes.
Friday, that was. And so Friday was a very big day politically for the prime minister on a lot of different levels, not just because it was the anniversary of the Ukrainian invasion, but also because he hosted a digital summit of the G7 leaders. And also he welcomed into the Diet briefing, the first physical briefing of the candidate for the Bank of Japan. Everything happened on that day. And there are a lot of other things that are going on that kind of generate movement going forward. And also as you listen to the pronouncements of these individuals and the way the country is going, you can also anticipate what's going to happen in the near term. So first of all, right off the bat, Maya, I heard that there was an earthquake in Hokkaido. I didn't catch that news yet, but apparently it was a 6-point something register.
Yes, magnitude 6.1 in Hokkaido off the coast of Kushiro, that is northern Hokkaido. And for the moment, there are no reports for material damages or, people who have been injured. Hopefully, we'll just continue to get the same of this. Yeah, so it was
So Kushiro is the northernmost city on Hokkaido, isn't that right? It's right there at the top. You used to live up in Hokkaido, right?
Yes, I lived in Sapporo for 3 years, but I traveled a lot, so I have been to Kushiro a couple of times. Yes, it's in the north of Hokkaido, and it's a beautiful place. Hopefully, things haven't been. There is no destruction there, so we'll continue following the news about this.
Okay, no tsunami warnings or anything like that.
No,
which is
no
great
tsunami warnings.
news.
No, nothing like that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for that. And also, coming to you from Hokkaido, there was several very provocative launches from North Korea just this last week. On Saturday, there was 4 ballistic missile launches, and on Monday, there was an additional 2. So this goes on at a time when the United States, South Korea, and Japan are having war games, desktop war games, in South Korea, and anticipating a kind of more war footing from North Korea. And I don't know if the two are interrelated, that was viewed or portrayed as a provocation. So North Korea fired cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. With regard to cruise missiles, there is no sanction of the UN on North Korea for experimenting or testing with cruise missiles, but for ballistic missiles, there certainly is, and they're sanctioned for pursuing that. Well, here's thumbing their nose at the UN Security Council because they tested another two, and reports are that you could see some of the evidence of those launches from Hokkaido. So it really put people in a state of alarm. The earlier ones on Saturday were immediately announced. The later ones on Monday were not announced in the press, and it's unclear why that is the case. Either they were failed launches, and we don't think that that's the case, or they just were not announced as a maybe a precaution to kind of not excite people. But one of the missile debris did fall into Japan's exclusive economic zone. And so that causes some concern and also some protestations by the Japanese government. So this is escalating. It continues to escalate. There was a brief period, late December, January, where there was very little action there. But now it looks like it's coming back on strong. That's potentially 6 missile launches, and 2 of them were fired. They went into the upper atmosphere. They did figure eights. They flew for about 170 minutes collectively over 2,000 kilometers, which means, the reason why they do the figure eight is to show everybody that every place in South Korea and in Japan is reachable by these missiles, and even the continental United States. So this delivery system, we don't know about the payloads, and they're also making progress on the payloads. So the next shoe to fall is possibly underground testing of other nuclear devices, probably smaller, more strategic in detonation. So this very worrying development just continues on its own path, and it's very worrying. It's something that we're going to continue to watch, but it also implicates, the relationship between the North Koreans and China, and what's going on with Russia, and the potential for Japan being confronted by a confrontation between Taiwan and China in, amalgamating Taiwan back into the Chinese fold. So that's something that is really taking on an invigoration that just doesn't seem to be abating. Even last week, there was foreign ministers joining, and representatives of various, states, China, Japan, the United States, in Munich, and there was a little bit of chest thumping that was going on there. Tony Blinken confronted his counterpart about, the balloons flying over. There was an admission that, yes, those were for spying, and we were collecting data there, and so what are you going to do about it, sort of thing. So the proposed trip from Anthony Blinken to go visit his counterpart in China was delayed as a consequence of that, and it's not back on schedule yet. So this escalation just continues to go forward. In concert with that is the development with Ukraine and their confrontation with Russia. As you know, President Joe Biden made a secret visit to Ukraine, to the capital city there. He visited with Zelensky, big brouhaha. They made a lot of press coverage out of that. It's a pretty big deal for the president to go into a war zone like that. So I guess it deserves a lot of press coverage. And that happened on Monday. On Tuesday, the prime minister of Italy visited Zelensky. So as it stands right now, Mr. Kishida is the only leader of the G7 countries who has not visited G7. You'll remember that the prime minister traveled to 6 nations just in January. It caused a little bit of trouble because his son was purchasing gifts and riding in embassy cars to collect gifts for people back in Japan. It caused a bit of a problem there. But he at that time, there was some discussion about him making a side trip to visit Kyiv. And that was canceled. It was viewed as premature, and it probably couldn't happen in that time frame, although there was a desire to do it. Since he did that trip and came back, there's been a lot of foreign visitors. You really want to be seen with Zelensky. It helps your numbers, apparently, for those countries that are supporting the Ukraine effort. And so the prime minister had planned again to make a secret visit, and that plan was leaked to the press, apparently through his son. It is being blamed on his son. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but that's the story that's being spread out. So they pulled back on that too, and it's another kind of black eye for the prime minister in hiring his oldest son, 32-year-old Shohei, to be his executive secretary, one of 7 secretaries that the prime minister has. So there's a little bit of consternation there. In the meantime, though, Diet proceedings continue unabated. They are considering the budget. The budget needs to be passed on April 1st, and it looks like the Diet is well on its way to achieving that. So this is one of the biggest challenges for the prime minister in this Diet session that started towards the end of January and will go until June 21st or thereabouts, is passing the budget. Typically, the Diet spends about 70 hours in the lower house considering the budget, debating it, talking about different aspects of it. That's a minimum amount before it goes to the upper house for the upper house's consideration. On Friday, they passed 66 hours of Diet deliberations. Today is the 26th, as I said, so the 27th is tomorrow. That's kind of their deadline for pushing it to the upper house, and I think that they will meet it. They're just a couple of hours short of the typical minimum. It is not a requirement, but it's just history has shown that about 70 hours is required for that. It looks like they will reach that on Monday. And when the budget is passed up, according to the Constitution, the upper house has 30 days to consider it and either pass it or push it back down to the lower house because they haven't been able to pass it. Inevitably, the lower house still gets to overrule the upper house if such a situation occurs. So essentially, when the budget passes the lower house, it is a done deal. As a courtesy, they give it to the upper house. They have 30 days to consider it. That puts us right about March 26th or 27th. Not a whole lot of wiggle room, but in any event, the budget will be passed, assuming it passes the lower house this week. So the prime minister is hell-bent on that. And typically what happens with the opposition parties, they have an opportunity when the prime minister has a deadline, when he's got an objective, a clear objective, he's made a pronouncement about meeting certain deadlines, where they begin to rabble-rouse and criticize policies. They criticize various ministers of state. They criticize the Sun. This was very muted this year. So apparently there was agreements made beforehand that the opposition parties would take a little bit of a backseat. They wouldn't be clawing, biting, scratching the prime minister and letting the budget process move forward. And I think that that's due to a couple of reasons. Probably the main one is that the Constitutional Democratic Party, which is the main opposition party, the largest opposition party, really just can't get its act together in a vibrant, aggressive way. So they had their annual convention just this last week, coincidentally enough. And they pulled together all of their resources to discuss and make decisions about how they are going to approach these local elections coming up in April. So 27% of all municipalities, governors, mayors throughout Japan will be going up for an election. And the opposition parties have sometimes successfully joined forces to defeat LDP candidates and share kind of supporters groups and votes in those districts where the the friendly opposition party knows that their candidate is not going to win. So they just give up on that and they throw their weight behind the other opposition party who has a better chance of winning, because the whole purpose here is defeating the LDP so that the opposition party can come back into power. And the tip for the tat there is that in another election district, that party will relinquish some of their votes so that that party can have at least a fighting chance against an LDP individual. So it looks like the opposition party is not really formed in a strong way to defeat the LDP as it stands right now. And as a result of that, the prime minister is going to meet his deadline of passing the budget probably this next week. And then you can anticipate that the game will change a little bit. I think with the Constitutional Democratic Party announcing their convention and the results of their convention, there's a little bit of a lackluster response from the general population about their ability to actually form a government or form a strong position against LDP issues. So it's something that I think will be changing over the next couple of weeks once the budget is passed, but we're going to keep an eye on that. The other thing that happened on Friday was the candidate for the Bank of Japan. We've talked about him enough. Ueda Kazuo finally sat down and displayed his prowess of Japanese finance and monetary policy to the lower house. And this is his kind of first coming out party. This candidate needs to be approved by the lower house and the upper house, and it looks like that will go forward. So what he said, how he said it, how he looked to the cameras, how he presented himself was critically important. So there was a lot of attention spent on that. It looks like he's not going to be, or he promotes that he's not going to be too aggressive. He's going to hold firm on the policies of the current governor of Japan, and hold those policies to a 2% inflation target. His position is that although the inflation is beyond 2%, it's hovering now around 4.2%, is that it's too volatile, it hasn't steadied out, and he needs to kind of hit that target on a normal, regular basis, and it needs to be supplemented by higher wages. And that's what he's waiting for before he begins to relent a little bit on the monetary policy. At least that's what he proposed. Mr. Kishida, on the other hand, said when we select a new person for the Bank of Japan governor, he needs to be very clever and crafty. He needs to be able to deal with the public, and he needs to get us out of Abenomics and move the country to a very steady, standard 2% inflation rate that Mr. Kuroda, the current governor, has not been able to achieve, not because of his own faults. I mean, it's a complicated process, but he's more hell-bent on achieving that and distancing himself from Abenomics. Let me see, the issue of the prime minister visiting Ukraine, sorry for going back a little bit, because it came up in the same kind of conversation on Friday. It looks like since Joe Biden, President of the United States, visited Kyiv, and also the Prime Minister of Italy, that the Prime Minister is going to figure some way to visit Kyiv. The problem with that is severalfold. Number one is just the logistics and the transportation of getting from Tokyo to Kyiv. So you've got overflight routes. You've got to go to you've got to get yourself to Poland first, and from Poland travel overland to get into the capital city. That's about an 8-hour trip. And the other thing, there are a couple of other things. So the police guard, the body that would protect him, with the President of the United States, you've got the Secret Service, who is well trained and probably one of the best at doing this sort of thing in the world. You've got the Prime Minister of Japan and the special police that promote and protect him. They don't know if they're really up to the job of taking the Prime Minister to a war zone and providing the right kind of protection. So they have to be creative there and probably ask or purchase more elevated resources in order to achieve that. But it looks like that's going to happen. It looks like the prime minister wants that to happen. He wants to be in the press. He wants to be seen as a global leader and as a peacemaker. And he also wants to have Zelensky come to Hiroshima when he hosts the G7 in May 19th to the 21st. So that would be a huge feather in his hat. The ambassador from Ukraine is promoting that and lobbying that. And the other thing that's really, really kind of interesting is that the prime minister also pledged an additional $5.2 billion to Ukraine this week. That's a lot of money, isn't it? $5.2 billion. And the interesting thing about that is that, I'm sorry, 5.5 billion, is that the grand total of the money that has gone to Ukraine from Japan is 7 billion. So that means that up until now, Japan has not been that aggressive. It has provided non-lethal aid. It's accepted a lot of Ukrainian refugees. It has provided support for countries that are supporting Ukraine. But their total now is at 7 because the prime minister pledged 5.5 on Friday. So that's a huge step up. In light of everything else that's going on, you've got to understand what that means to Ukraine. So I guess it means that the prime minister will visit Kiev on the tails of that pledge, and also that Zelensky, depending on the situation at the time, would more likely than not honor the request or the invitation by the prime minister to come to Hiroshima during the G7 summit. So a lot of things are building up for the G7. There was a ministerial meeting of the foreign ministers just this last week. I think that was in Bangalore in India, to facilitate and foster that. And then in April, towards the end of April, more than 32 sub-summits will start to occur throughout Japan, in Karuizawa, in Hakone, in Kyoto, in Tokyo, to supplement the whole culmination in Hiroshima on the 19th through the 21st. So it is a big deal. The prime minister, as you know, as we've reported here, is still lobbying to get President Joe Biden not just in Hiroshima, but also to have a side visit to Nagasaki as well. And the added interest of having Zelensky there, the public security and the protections that are going to be demanded as a result of that, it's going to be a big deal. It's going to kind of boost the economy here with that many people traveling in all of the hotels, all of the cabs, all of the resources devoted to all of the diplomats that are coming here. So it is a very big deal for the prime minister. And as you know, the sequence is that there's the G7 summit, and then we move very quickly into the elections of this 27% of the municipalities and governors and mayors that the LDP really must do a good job on if the prime minister wants to stay prime minister, which he does. And there are many people who are really not in that camp, particularly in the LDP. They're finished with the prime minister. They want him to move on. The top contender for that, there are several, we've talked about them before, and until kind of the die is cast that there will be an election, that the prime minister is going to take advantage of that and close down the House, or he feels like he has enough wind in his sails and he's done it well enough in the Hiroshima summit and also in the local elections, that people will more likely vote for him and his policies than won't. Then he'll make that gamble and make that decision. One of the top contenders is in the former Abe faction, and he is also promoting a way of paying for this 2% increase in defense spending. Hagiura is his name. He's in the lower house, and he is probably the top contender to take over the Abe faction, the 98-member Abe faction, which, as everybody knows, is almost twice as large as the next largest faction. And his proposal to have other ways of spending and collecting money to pay for the defense spending just took a turn for the worse as far as he's concerned. This last week, they did a poll. A majority of Japanese voters has said, we like the way the proposal the prime minister has promoted for paying for this defense spending. And Mr. Hagiura's counter proposal is taking less of a shine these days. So if you're thinking that Mr. Hagiura has a clean way forward, it's not absolutely clear. And he's not the only contender. So when you have several more contenders against somebody who is holding the position already, you've got to really have more than just a push to topple them. So this is all beginning to build. The next time that an election is potentially likely to happen could be during the local elections, where the prime minister says, look, we've got 27% of the municipal elections anyway. We've got 4 Diet seats that are going to be happening on the same time, these by-elections, because somebody died or somebody resigned or somebody was kicked out of office. There are 4 of those seats. So let's just go ahead and do that and hold an election for the lower house then. You need about 26 days, 25 days before that election happens to call that. So that would be sometime, just around the time that G7 is happening. So a lot of trepidation is approaching as we approach the G7. So we'll keep our eye out on that. Mr. Hayashi, he's the foreign secretary, the foreign minister. He's also number 2 in the Kishida faction. They're very close friends. He comes from Yamaguchi, which is also the prefecture of the slain Prime Minister, Mr. Abe, and it is also the election district, the election prefecture of Mr. Kishi, who was Mr. Abe's younger brother, who just resigned his seat, and his son is going to be running in his stead. And Mr. Hayashi, like I said, had a meeting in Bangalore just this last week. His star is increasing to rise. And Mr. Suga, the prime minister who was defeated as a candidate by Mr. Kishida almost exactly a year and 2 months ago. What was I going to say about Mr. Suga? So Mr. Suga has complained about the prime minister still holding his position as the head of the Kishida faction. In traditional Japanese politics, when you become prime minister, you resign your leadership of the faction because you're supposed to be representing all of the LDP. This prime minister hasn't done that, and he's received a lot of heat for it. And the person who would stand to gain from that is Mr. Hayashi, the current foreign minister, who is he's very affable. He's all over the news. You know, Mr. Kishida was foreign minister for 10 years as well, so he knows the power of that position. The fact that he's not relinquishing it to Mr. Hayashi is somewhat suggestive, and I think the criticism by Mr. Suga is not ill-placed. So you're probably going to hear a little bit more about that as the heat begins to generate about, you know, Mr. Kishida, why don't you resign? Why don't you move over? People don't like you. Your economic policies are not in tune with, you know, fixing the economy. You're really good overseas, and thank you for bringing everybody to, you know, your election district of Hiroshima for G7, but it's time for you to move on. And in fact, I think it's not inaccurate to say that were it not for the G7 summit, probably there would have been a move on the prime minister already this year. So a lot of people are biding their time and waiting for that. The other issue that's confronting the prime minister, and that he has devoted a lot of time and resources to in Diet hearings, is what we're going to do with children. How come people aren't having children? What is the solution for the decline in birth rate? This is a phenomenon that's not just in Japan. Probably it's happening more severely in Japan than it is in other countries. So people are watching how Japan deals with it, so that when that peak begins to hit them, they can begin to follow the pattern or maybe avoid the problems that Japan generated in their move to have, a less decline in birth rate and have more people joining the workforce. It's a very complicated situation, but he has said that he is going to have, he's going to take steps on a different dimension in dealing with the childbirth situation. So he's made pronouncements. The defense budget is going to go from 1% of defense of the GDP to 2% over the next 5 years, and it's ramped up very quickly to achieve that. There's been controversy about how to pay for that. With regard to children and child rearing, he has said that I want it to be 4% of GDP. So that is dramatically different than the situation is right now. And there are a lot of ways that you might think that could be ways to enhance childbirth, for example, childcare, education, stipends, giving money to people who do have children. Singapore has a similar issue with declining birth rates, and 1 in 6 households has domestic help at the house, helping them with chores and stuff like that. And even with that, the birth rate continues to decline. So the Prime Minister is focused not just on enhancing the lives of people, but he's looking elsewhere too to see what has worked and what hasn't worked. So your kind of initial assumption that if people had more money or if they had more help at home, if the nuclear family was more of a core value, which seems to be one of the concepts of the LDP is promoting, there are structural ways that are hampering that. For anybody that lives in Japan, the number of abandoned houses throughout Japan is just so enormous. Akiya, as they're called. And even in this district where I am now, in Chiba, towards Katsuyama, where I spend a lot of my time, even in this small district, it's not even a major city, there are 700 abandoned houses in this area. So the people are leaving, their kids are not staying around where mom and dad raised them, they're coming into the cities. And that also complicates, the distribution of elections and votes, and leads us to the 10-10 situation, which we discussed earlier. And I'm not going to get into 10-10 now, but it means gerrymandering must accommodate where people are collecting as voters, and those are the major cities, and where they are leaving, and those are the rural areas, Yamaguchi being one of those. So that's a big thing to look forward to as well. So I think over the next couple of months, you're going to see real progress and a lot of pronouncements about childcare and about enhancing the quality of life of families who have children, 1, 2, 3. It probably gets better the more children that you have. And I think that this is going to have a real steamrolling kind of feel to it. Not only the central government, but also the governor of Tokyo is also pushing that, even though the policies of Tokyo are move out of Tokyo and we'll give you 1 million yen. Start a company outside of Tokyo metropolitan area, which is not just the city proper, but also the surrounding suburban area. If you move beyond that, Tokyo will pay you money. They will give you money for every child that you have in addition to that. So there are a couple of things that are going there. They're trying to depopulate Tokyo because it's such a magnet and so many people are coming here. And it turns out that when they come here, then they turn out having fewer children. The other big issue, we're now at the end of February. Hallelujah, it's almost March. And then after March is April, the flowers come out. The Spring Festival will start towards the end of March and go into the beginning of April. That's when all the cherry blossoms bloom and everybody's in a very good mood. So it's also the time for the wage offensive called Shunto, where the labor unions negotiate with the big companies to get wage increases. And there is a tremendous amount of effort there now. We've talked about consumer price index and the prices that have gone on over the increases in January are the greatest and the most rapid increase in the last 40 years. It is amazing what's happened in January. Energy prices rose 14.6%. So overall price index is 4.4% above inflation. So with energy prices, that's 14.6% increase. Electricity and city gas climbing 20% and 35% respectively. And food prices went up 7.4%. Food prices are generally a little bit more volatile, so they go up and come down a little bit more rapidly. But the companies that are producing and manufacturing food products have passed on the increases that they're getting from the raw materials put in to the consumers. And frequently you need government approval to do that. Government approval has been granted months ago to go and take effect in February and in March. And also the gas prices and electricity has been subsidized by the Japanese government going into effect in February and March. So you're going to see the consumer price index lowering a little bit, but that's only because of the artificial power that is being injected by the Japanese government. So the Japanese Bank of Japan has maintained a monetary easing policy for 2% inflation, and they're targeting stable growth and development. It can't happen without wage increases. So a couple of the announcements over this last week by Aeon, which is a retail company, has announced a 7% increase. Universal Studios also a 7% increase for workers. 40% of the Japanese population are non-regular. They're not seishain. They're not the long-term employees. They're contract workers, maybe for limited periods of time or less than a year. Actually, is what that term means. So they're on a rolling contract. 40% of the Japanese population are those kinds of workers. They don't have a standard salary year on year that might be increased 4% or 5%, and they don't enjoy as much the bonuses that are being distributed. So Toyota really stepped out. Toyota is probably the main engine. It's one of the many, but it is one of the main engines of export growth for Japan. It pumps a lot of money into the economy, and Toyota carries a lot of weight. I mean, the chairman of Toyota was for a while there the chairman of Keidanren, the Japanese business organization, the largest lobbying group in Japan. And they announced a twofold increase for the hourly wage and for the monthly wage, and also they packed it in with a bonus of about 6 months. So if you're a worker in Toyota and you want higher wages, what Toyota apparently has done is said, we'll raise your wages a little bit more. It's not going to cover all of the increases of inflation, but we're going to give you a big bonus. That's a one-time payment, and let's revisit this next year. So it's a kind of a clever way of avoiding this ramping up of wages that are going to stick with you. You're not going to, once you increase the wages, it's really difficult to diminish them. So Toyota is attempting to set the pattern. Not everybody's going to follow them. Not everybody's going to pay 6 months of a bonus for their standard workers. But they are making a great effort, probably encouraged by the Japanese national government. There are two other things. There's just one other thing I wanted to talk about, Maya, and that's tourism, a favorite topic, because it is an activant of many other things in the Japanese economy. And it looks like in January, the numbers are in now since we're at the end of February, it looks like the number of visitors in Japan for January was 1.5 million, which is great. It's still not up to the 2019 numbers, but is substantially better than it was 3 months ago, 4 months ago. And the numbers break down like this. Interestingly enough, more than 50% of the visitors in January came from Taiwan and Korea. Hong Kong came in third, and the United States was fourth with the number of visitors. But still, we're less than 44% of where we were in 2019. The Chinese visitors in January were down 95% from where we were in 2019, even in light of the Chinese Lunar New Year, where a lot of people have time off. The Chinese visitors in January still needed to be tested individually when they hit Japan. Not everybody is treated that way. And those requirements for China will be falling away in March, and they'll be treated just like everybody else, whether they've had testing or not. So the China policy, the no COVID policy, is also beginning to show signs of changing. But as far as travelers to Japan, the Japanese really want it. They want to encourage travel. They're going to reduce the restrictions for masking outside and in some restaurants. So you're going to begin to see a lot more of that. And Maya, I'm sure you're a careful observer too, and you're out on the town a lot. You've noticed also the influx of foreigners into the city, haven't you?
Oh, yes, I have. And the good thing is that it's foreigners not only as short-time visitors, but foreigners who are obviously here, to find work, to also stay maybe in for 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years. So I have seen that not only downtown, but in my neighborhood as well, which is I think a great trend nowadays. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, the foreign ministry has announced that it's going to relax immigration rules so that highly skilled individuals can come with the prospects of having a permanent residency granted to them, or to be able to come in a little bit more freely, not just on a 90-day tourist visa. You can't earn any money on that kind of a visa, but to encourage more people to come to Japan and consider this as a career change. And I think you're going to see a lot of that happening as we enter into the summer months.
I think so too, and it is exciting to observe, definitely. Hopefully the companies here who are struggling to find workers, they will benefit from this too.
There's a lot of that going on too. Anyway, that
Yeah.
kind of wraps up the briefing today. Maya, I'm eager to get to our Q&A period that is exclusively on Clubhouse, and we'll sign off here, and so I can join you and the Clubhouse attendees on hearing what their views are, maybe getting better educated from them on their insight, and also just having a rounder completion of this Japanese politics one-on-one briefing. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for this briefing again. And I'll see you on the other side in Clubhouse. To everybody watching us on Clubhouse, sorry, that's
LinkedIn.
Yes.
YouTube.
Thank you. Yes. LinkedIn and YouTube. This was the Japanese politics session, the 108th session with Timothy Langley, delivered to you by Japan Expert Insights. I'll see you on the other side, Timothy. Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
See you on the other side. Bye, Maya.
Bye.